Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today I kind of wanted to talk a little bit more about the process that I have in working through commissions. So you can see the photo that I'm using as reference on the left, and I'm basically starting by mapping out the outer shapes of the face. So a lot of artists that I know don't really do it in this way, but it's kind of just become my own method, and I don't know that a lot of people do it in this way, but I start usually around the forehead of the shape, and I'm essentially working with the shadows rather than the specific distances that there are supposed to be between all the shapes of the face. So I generally start by working on the outer perimeter and then working my way in, utilizing the shapes between spaces, essentially. I don't really know if that makes any sense, but you can sort of see what I'm doing here. I will work from my reference very often, and I think the most important things to keep map of essentially are the forehead, and then I will work from the outer ridges and work my way in, kind of using a blocking technique to figure out the distances between the shapes rather than focusing in on the actual shapes themselves. And I've noticed that when doing it in this method, the thing that helps me really capture the features most accurately, I found, is not necessarily looking at an eye as if it's an eye, but looking at an eye and trying to see what other thing it reminds me of. Because I feel like when you focus so intensely on this is an eye, this is, a lip, this is a tooth, then you have this sort of like image in your head already of what that's supposed to look like. And when I was starting out drawing, anyways, I would just draw a circle for the eyes, circular shapes for the eyes, or I would draw a square shape for the tooth because that's kind of what you think of when you think of those things. So your brain just kind of starts trying to fill in the gaps rather than actually looking at your reference photo and trying to see, okay, what does this look like? What other thing does this look like? What other shapes does it have? And another thing that has been greatly helpful for me in using references for work is, or just in general in doing portraits, is always trying to make more of an angular shape within the shapes. So you can kind of see with the eyes, they're not perfectly circular. They're slightly sharp curves to them, rather than it just being a circular shape, if that makes any sense. I wanted to talk a little bit more as well about my process for coloring because that's another thing that I feel. I mean, of course, these things aren't unique to me. I don't pretend to believe that. I'm not the kind of person that believes that there is really a lot of uniqueness within creative fields at this point because it's just so many things have probably already been done. But my process is my own, and I guess I wanted to share my thinking behind it in the way that I color and the way that I map things out. I'm very worried often about getting my blends correct and getting the sharp quality of a pencil drawing present within a marker drawing. And that was such a reason why I've stuck to doing graphite work for such a long portion of my art career, was that it's just so hard to get those crisp, precise lines and to convey those sort of perfect edges when you're using a marker. There's just no way to do that. So the technique that I've started using when I delved a bit more into color was to block everything out first with my pens. And in doing this, I'm trying the best that I can to preserve that sharp quality of the graphite lines, which I think again get kind of lost whenever you're using color or whenever you're painting. And this could just be because I'm still relatively green with the whole using colors thing. But doing it in this method, I like it because it gives my art a bit of a like cartoony meets realism vibe, and I've always really appreciated the pop that it has. a lot of my art when I was growing up was inspired by anime style art and just cartoons in general, and that's always been important for me, trying to convey that in the work that I do. Another thing that I've really been wanting to talk about that I used to hate drawing when I was younger is hair. It is one of those things where you have to put the time into it. I used to just want to focus on the face because to me that was the most important thing. But once I started getting more and more involved in doing hair, and once I started spending a bit more time on it, I realized just how much it helps a drawing pop. The most important thing I think with hair is just accepting that you have to layer. And I'll talk a bit more about hair as I do it a little bit more later on in this video. But the thing is that you have to just accept that it's going to take a lot of time, and you have to accept that it's going to take many layers. When I first started doing hair in this way, I would almost become frustrated because it would feel like I was hiding all of the work that I was putting into it. But without those layers underneath it, it doesn't give you that depth of quality and that life that you want your hair to have. As far as the strokes go now, I think the most helpful bit of advice that I could give on any new artist or any green artists that are, and when I say green, I mean new, you know what I mean? But I think the most important thing is not only spacing, but variation in the way that you lay the hairs down next to each other. When I first started doing hair, I would literally, and I see this often actually, I would literally just lay down lines very parallel to one another, and that's not the way you really want to do it. You want to sort of, again, block out and section out different parts of the hair and then sort of make them flow. And I'm getting into a different part of the video that I also want to talk about as well with the outlining. So I will try and detail this a little bit further once we get back into the hair again. But basically, making your lines curve and flow into one another and having a bit of variation in the distance between them and the way that the shapes are pulled is really going to go so far in giving your hair more life than it typically would get if you just have parallel lines next to one another. Now, what I'm working on now is another part of my process for getting, again, just as much sharpness and as much graphite like quality into my drawings as I possibly can. Even the way that I'm doing the marker or the pen outline here, it's almost exactly the same way as I would use a pencil. Getting into this video too as well, it's a great example for how I color in portraits as far as skin tone goes, because this is a darker skinned, well, very light skin actually, but a darker, deeper skin tone than what I often do. And the reason for this being is that I think a lot of this goes into internalized racism that I probably had growing up in not putting in the time to draw folks with deeper skin tones. And my excuse for this has always been, oh, I just don't know how to work with deeper skin tones. I don't know what colors to lay down. And that's not an excuse, because the longer I do something, the better I will get at it. So the main difference that I do when I'm laying down the base for the pen drawing, I don't know if you could really tell, but earlier in this video I was using an orange tone, and with a lighter skin tone, I would normally use a pink tone to lay down the shapes on the eyes and to, get all those initial pen markings down. But again, in this drawing in particular, any brown skinned folks that I ever draw, I always lay down orange lines if they're a lighter skinned black person, or if they're a lighter skinned person of color. But if I'm going into even deeper skin tones than that, I will lay down purple for the outline. And that's another thing that I'll have to go into at another point in this, at another video, because I'm personally making it my own goal to draw more people of color and to actually figure that out. And that actually brings up a good point with these markers that I bought. Another huge reason why I've normally strayed from drawing more people of color as much as I would want to actually is because I've always found a very disappointing availability of flesh toned markers. This set that I'm using right now is from Arteza. I believe if you go to their website, and I will link this in the comments or in the
bio down below. Not the bio, what am I trying to say? I will link this in the caption, there we go, down below, what exact kit this is that I used. But I'm actually pretty impressed by these markers so far. Arteza in general has been an excellent source of art supplies for me recently, and I was first exposed to them actually through a collaboration, and I have just continued to buy from them ever since. You kind of miss a bit of this because the camera cut out while I was recording, but that whole first layer of skin tones that I was using is all the same marker. And I love that about Arteza because, and actually a lot of alcohol based markers, because you can just continue to layer them the same color on top of itself and just get a nice depth of color and a nice gradation of color from light to dark just by layering them. So that's another really great reason why I like these markers. But specifically with this set, going back into drawing people of color, it is an incredible range of deeper skin tones. Most of the kits that I've ever used, most of the art sets or marker sets that I've ever used have just a very, very disappointing range of darker skin tones. And this kit finally actually has realistic variation in skin tones and flesh tones instead of just having one brown marker and then a million different peach tones. It's always been incredibly frustrating. And when I've tried to do deeper skin tones before, I was always frustrated because in order to get the depth of color that I wanted, I would have to layer so much to the point to where it would just become muddy and I wasn't able to accurately capture the tone that I wanted. This wouldn't be a problem if I was using paints, but to me, paints are just the biggest pain, and I'm not sure that I will ever fully understand how to use them as a creator. But again, that's something that I definitely want to push myself to do, and getting into painting is an avenue that I really find so necessary to push myself to the level that I want to be at as an artist and to push the capabilities that I have for blending skin tones. That being said, though, I do love what marker affords me as far as personal style. A commissioner actually said this to me recently, that they've noticed that my art style is almost like very color blocking, and I would absolutely agree with that. I don't I'm kind of neurotic when it comes to trying to blend colors, and that's the most frustrating thing about markers is it doesn't really allow you to do that. Maybe if I tried Copics, I don't know. But even with, oh, and also this isn't specific marker paper, so that does kind of affect the way that the colors blend onto one another. But I've noticed that even with the best marker paper, even with relatively high quality markers, it's just kind of impossible for me, anyways, to get a completely smooth blend with markers. So, what you'll see me doing here and what my process is, which is probably relatively similar to painting actually, is just layering and layering, always starting with a wash of color as the base skin tone and then deepening it from there. That has always been my technique, and I think that it might be something worth going into and changing, because I'm not sure that that's technically the way you're supposed to do art. A lot of the things that I have learned anyways, and a lot of my methods are just things that I learned just from practice and just from finding what works best for me. And that's another piece of invaluable information that I want to pass along is if there's something that you're frustrated with or there's something that you're not too great at, you have to push yourself into doing that and figuring out what methods work for you, even if it's not technically the proper way to do it. Again, I didn't, well, not again, I don't think I've said this before, but I didn't go to art school. So a lot of what I've learned was just trial and error. And I don't think that anyone really should limit themselves in getting an art education just because they can't afford one. Your best art education is to literally just never stop creating and to always be trying to find new techniques and look on YouTube, because there's just invaluable resources that I use myself in order to learn how to do new things and try new art processes.
I think another thing that has kind of deterred me from delving more into making portraits of folks with deeper skin tones is it's a lot more daunting of a task. And I've talked already about how I used to prefer graphite drawings because they're very it's a very forgiving medium. If you mess something up, you just erase it. I mean, I have a very, very heavy hand, so that's also been something I've had to work on
easing up, but really that's the only hole that you could fall into as far as messing up your art if you're using graphite, is you just have to be able to not use such a heavy hand and erase. Now, with using marker, there's always been such an element of worrying about pushing it too far, worrying about adding too much color, worrying about making the portrait too muddy. With lighter skin tones, it's very easy to kind of just let the paper do most of the work, and there isn't a lot of building of tones that you necessarily have to worry about. However, with deeper skin tones, you have to be willing to really push those dark contrasts and really push the saturation of color, which has always been something that has very much frightened me. So, again, like I said earlier, I'm going to make it a point to actually draw very, very deep skin tones and illustrate very, very deep skin tones, because I feel like that will be my best education and my best deterrent from being too frightened to go into that realm and to actually use deeper contrast. It's something that I feel like, especially with artists like Caravaggio and Rembrandt, it's something that really just adds a sense of drama to drawings, and I really think that it will become an invaluable tool moving forward in my art career. So here I am just layering and layering and layering and layering some more markers. And I think that the best tip that I can give you for this, if you're also worried about pushing the color too far, like I am very often worried about, is to just kind of go slow, take your time, and do your best not to add too much color in one pass. I I think that's why, for me anyways, I start off with lighter tones and then continue building my way up. But come to think of it, if you are afraid of having that higher saturation and that higher contrast, it might be worth actually starting with the darker colors and then moving up to light. It's something I will try out and I will report back and kind of let you know how it goes. So I'm getting back into hair at this point, speaking of layering. With hair, that again is just something you cannot avoid. You have to be willing to add layers in order to give it more depth, more life. What I do when I am coming in with markers, so I guess very briefly, I will go through the actual steps that I do in hair. So you start off with the graphite lines. It's kind of like a basic sketch where you are, like I said earlier in the video, blocking out shapes and laying them down to give you sort of a rough sketch, a rough idea of where you want to go with it. And that is probably one of the most important steps of the drawing, because everything else after that is monotony, tedium. And if you get that first step right, it just makes the rest of it go so much smoother. There's so much less room for error. After you do that, if you're, willing to or wanting to step into doing hair in the way that I do, you go in with the marker sketch like I did earlier in the video. And, or not the marker, I mean the pen outline. And this is really just getting down all of those precise shapes that I was talking about earlier. In this step, it is so important. I mean, I have a very specific, like, Medusa-like quality to my hair where I almost want it to feel alive. So I sort of think about it flowing in a very water-like state. And in doing that, I just get a lot of waves and ripples in the hair. And that lends itself to the marker and the color that comes down after that being so much easier to add on. As you saw me doing just a few seconds earlier, I start out with the deeper tones actually with hair and then build my way up into the lighter tones. And I use the deeper tones to add in depth and shadow and try and portray where the hair is falling on itself, where the hair is overlapping. And then you come in and you add the highlights and the lighter colors towards the end. I'm not sure if I do it at all in this video, but my final step for hair usually is going back in with colored pencil. And again, this is just, like I was saying earlier, I want to try and portray the sharpness that my graphite drawings have. And so that is why at the very end, I'll go in with colored pencil, because the drawings usually get relatively muddy and, not muddy, but it loses that precision and that sharpness. This is one of my favorite kind of colors, or you just barely miss me using it. One of my favorite colors to use in general towards the end of any project is a purple, a lavenderish color, and a gray.
And I use the lavender color primarily to get the deeper recesses of the face, and it almost gives you that underskin blue vein kind of effect. And I think that that is another tip that I use. A lot of people will think, oh, you're drawing flesh tones, so you want to use peaches and pinks and warm tones. But I found that adding that pop of contrast with the purple, or even blue sometimes, if you want to have that really like heavy set, tired, sunken look, is going to go so far in, again, bringing life to your drawing, which if you're doing portraiture, that's, maybe you don't want it to be super lifelike, but if you're doing portraiture, that is such a huge part of the process. So now I am going in with colored pencils, and these are Arteza colored pencils as well, but I literally used to use Crayola and Sharpie, so I personally don't think that it's necessary to use super high quality materials as long as you're willing to work with them and utilize them and figure out how they work for you. The reason I go in with colored pencils at the end as well, not only does it help me keep that sharpness, but it is a little bit less terrifying than going in with a very dark marker to go in with a very dark colored pencil. It is easier to blend. It adds a different kind of texture onto the marker as well, which is part of the reason why I really like to use it. But it's just kind of become a nice way for me to blend on top of the marker and to kind of hide or smooth out some of those rougher marker lines. For the last 2 minutes of this video, this is kind of random and I will go into it in a bit more depth in another video, but I wanted to talk briefly about pricing for commissions and getting commission work. When I started out doing commissions about 5 years ago, I priced them severely lower, significantly lower than what I do now. And I think that as you develop your skill, as you develop your business style, you can start increasing those things, and your work will demand those prices. The more experience that you get, the more call there is for the work that you're putting out. I think that the most important thing in getting commission work is to just put yourself out there to get commission work and let people know that you're available to do it. The second piece of that I also think is most important is don't do work for free because you don't think that you deserve it. That is just the biggest no-no. People will respect you if you set down what your boundaries are, what your requirements are, what your needs are when it comes to the work that you were doing and the work that you were putting out. I have developed probably the greatest relationship with commissioners that I have ever had with a lot of human beings, actually, and that I could have ever even hoped to have an experience. And it's one of those things where you legitimately just have to take your time with it, be patient with it, and develop your own business style, I guess, even just in the same way that you're developing your own art style. So I wanted to thank you guys for watching this video. Please let me know if there are any further questions that you have that I didn't really answer about my process in this video. I will be posting a questions and answers kind of video overlapping some doodles that I've done recently in response to questions that people had for me on my Instagram. The world is in a state right now, and I just want to remind you guys to take care of yourselves, take care of each other. I'll see you next time.